What is Pan Africanism? Pan Africanism is grounded in the belief that all African descendants, whether inside or outside the continent, are one nation, due to sharing an interconnected history. It was a political movement and an ideology that was very popular during the 20s, so when colonialism was still flourishing. Du Bois, Kwame Nkrumah, Marcus Garvey, and Malcolm X were some of the leading characters who wanted to create a counter view against the Eurocentric view of Black people at that time.
Pan-Africanism is a political, cultural, and ideological movement rooted in the belief that all people of African descent, on the continent and throughout the diaspora, share a common history, struggle, and destiny, and must unite to reclaim power, dignity, and control over their own narratives, economies, and political futures. Emerging as a response to centuries of colonialism, slavery, exploitation, and systemic racism, Pan-Africanism seeks to dismantle the artificial borders imposed by European imperialism and to create a collective African identity that transcends geography, language, and religion. It emphasizes self-reliance, cultural pride, economic cooperation, and political solidarity as tools to fight global anti-Black oppression and the continued extraction of African resources. The philosophy insists that the liberation of one Black nation is meaningless without the liberation of all, and that true freedom comes not through integration into oppressive systems, but through unity, sovereignty, and ownership of land, culture, and legacy. In a world that continuously fragments and commodifies Black identity, Pan-Africanism serves as both a healing ideology and a revolutionary blueprint, reminding all Black people, from Harlem to Harare, that their futures are deeply intertwined and their power unmatched when unified.
When you say to me African culture, I always say there are three types. Pre-colonial, the one that developed during colonialism because of permeations from religion, and the post-colonial, which really was a cementation of the so-called Pan-African movement, which we have not talked about here, which itself was a reaction to colonialism. Because if you do that, you will begin to ask, what was Africa before Africa was Africa? Pan-Africanism even does not ask that, because Pan-Africanism, rightly so, was a reaction to colonialism.
Before colonialism violently disrupted African life, Black civilizations across the continent were thriving, interconnected, and built on complex systems of governance, trade, culture, and spiritual belief that challenged the racist myth of a primitive Africa. Pan-Africanism exists precisely because colonialism erased this truth. In West Africa, empires like Mali and Songhai maintained vast trade networks that connected them to Europe, the Middle East, and Asia, dealing in gold, salt, textiles, iron, and books. Timbuktu was a global center of learning with libraries and universities that rivaled any in medieval Europe. Across the continent, trade was largely fair, built on reciprocity, mutual respect, and sustainable practices, not exploitation. East African city-states like Kilwa and Mombasa flourished through trade with Arab and Indian merchants, exchanging ivory, spices, and fine crafts, while maintaining local autonomy. African societies collaborated through kinship systems, collective farming, shared governance, and spiritual traditions that emphasize balance, justice, and community over conquest. There was war. No civilization is perfect. But unlike colonial empires, African conflicts didn't aim to erase whole cultures or enslave people for global profit. Colonialism wasn't an introduction to civilization. It was a calculated destruction of one. Pan-Africanism stands to remind Black people that before we were colonized, we were creators, philosophers, engineers, traders, and artists, and we can be again on our own terms.
Let's be clear. South Africans are not xenophobic, honestly. They are waking up to the rot that hides behind the word Pan-Africanism. They are waking up to the corruption that is taking place within their country, right? I'm all about unity and Pan-Africanism, right? But Pan-Africanism is about trading among yourselves, among Africans. It's not about burdening each other with problems, right?
Pan-Africanism today suffers from a deep crisis of reciprocity, and South Africa is the clearest example of that failure. Every African nationality has a footprint in South Africa. Nigerians, Zimbabweans, Congolese, Somalis, Malawians, Ethiopians, all flooding into a country already struggling with poverty, unemployment, and inequality. The issue isn't immigration in itself. is that this mass influx is overwhelmingly one-sided. South Africans fought, bled, and died for their land under apartheid, facing bullets, tanks, and international isolation to reclaim their country. Yet now they're being asked to share its limited resources with people who did not share that burden. Meanwhile, the nations these migrants come from remain largely unchanged, with corrupt leaders, weak civic resistance, and crumbling infrastructures. If Africans across the continent do not fight for their countries the way South Africans fought for theirs, if they abandon their homes instead of fixing them, then the dream of a united Africa becomes a hollow fantasy. A continent cannot unite when one country is expected to carry the economic and social burden of an entire region. True Pan-Africanism demands mutual responsibility, not exploitation disguised as brotherhood. Without reciprocity, without each nation taking accountability for its own liberation, Pan-Africanism becomes not unity, but dependency, and that benefits no one in the long run.
Pan-Africanism was never about allowing the worst failures of other governments to flood another country. In this case, it's South Africa. This word or this ideology has been hijacked by corrupt leaders, global NGOs like the UN, and South African elites who don't live where you live or suffer like you suffer or bear the brunt of the atrocities that are being committed by illegal immigrants. Many illegal immigrants are not refugees, guys. They're economic opportunists. Let's repeat that. They're economic opportunists. Nigerian syndicates, they run drugs. Zimbabweans flee ZANU-PF's destruction of their homeland. ZANU-PF actually destroyed Zimbabwe, right? And you can't leave your own country just to go and sell drugs in another country. Aye, guys, that's not it. And Congolese and Somalians hijack, in fact, informal economy. No taxes and no IDs. We can also blame Home Affairs, which is why we talk of the corruption that is taking place within South Africa. Meanwhile, poor South Africans are pushed out of jobs, clinics, and housing. Right? Steve Biko never meant for South Africa to carry the weight of failed regimes. Pan-Africanism doesn't mean suicide. It means shared responsibility. It means trading among each other, not inheriting each other's problems. Fix your home first. Let's fix our homes first before we burden another country with problems. When we go to other countries, let's make sure that we are offering solutions and rare skills.
Pan-Africanism was never meant to be a rescue mission that involves opening borders blindly and absorbing the burdens of failed states. It was meant to be a system of shared knowledge, skills, and empowerment so that every African nation could stand on its own. The original spirit of Pan-Africanism was about collective upliftment, not relocation. It was about liberating the whole continent through mutual learning, political education, resource sharing, and strategic collaboration. Not collapsing one functioning state by overcrowding it with the problems others refuse to fix. When people abandon their homelands and flood into countries like South Africa without contributing to or replicating the same fight for justice back home, they're not practicing Pan-Africanism, they're avoiding accountability. A true brother does not let his house burn and then move into yours with no plan, no tools, and no intention of rebuilding his own. Real Pan-Africanism means standing where you are, demanding change, and using the collective wisdom of other African struggles as fuel, not an escape plan. South Africa cannot carry the weight of an entire continent while its own people remain unemployed, underserved, and displaced in their own land. That's not unity, it's collapse. Borders will only open when all of Africa understands what Pan-Africanism truly means, when the philosophy is not just held by a few relatively privileged nations, but embraced by the whole. Right now, it feels like only a handful of countries believe in the ideal, while those with less exploit it without contributing to its foundation. Until every nation commits to the fight for their own freedom and development, there can be no united Africa, only a divided one masquerading as solidarity.